I'm really going to mess with you here because I'm going to keep my back there so I can read the scripture. If you would put it up on the screen. Well, that looks really good too. So I want you guys to read the scriptures with me. This is a text that transfers very, very well over the couple of thousand years. In other words, Jesus is talking to Peter in the middle of this text. And it's really for Peter that language is. But it transfers beautifully to you and I. So I want you to read this text and think about this text as Jesus is asking us, do you love me? And we're responding, yes. And then Jesus is saying, feed my sheep. All right? So go ahead and struggle along and read with me. When they had finished breakfast, Jesus said to Simon Peter, Simon, son of John, do you love me more than these? He said to him, yes, Lord, you know that I love you. Jesus said to him, feed my lambs. A second time he said to him, Simon, son of John, do you love me? He said to him, yes, Lord, you know that I love you. Jesus said to him, tend my sheep. He said to him the third time, Simon, son of John, do you love me? Peter felt hurt because he said to him the third time, do you love me? And he said to him, Lord, you know everything. You know that I love you. Jesus said to him, feed my sheep. Very truly, I tell you, when you were younger, you used to fasten your own belt to go wherever you wished. But when you grow old, you will stretch out your hands. Someone else will fasten a belt around you and take you where you do not wish to go. He said this to indicate the kind of death by which he would glorify God. After this, he said to him, follow me. My name is Henry Woodall. My wife and I moved here to Wenatchee in September of last year, and I want to thank you for taking care of our family. For the good sense to hire our daughter several years ago. We are glad to be here and glad to be enjoying your company in this journey together. Peter was one of the very first ones that we're told was called by Jesus. It's very possible that Peter and Andrew had been seeing Jesus around. It's very possible they knew some of the people that were following John, the baptizer, beforehand. And that some of them kind of slid over from John maybe to following Jesus. But we get this early call story from Peter in the Gospel of John. And he's called Simon, son of John. That was his actual name. Peter becomes a title almost that Jesus gives him a little later on. Peter was the one that said, you are the Christ. You're the Messiah. Jesus said to him, blessed are you, Simon, for God showed you this. Not long in the same conversation, he also says to him, get behind me, Satan, for you do not have in mind the things of God, but rather the things of people. Seemed to be who Peter was. He'd run forward, he'd boldly go, he'd confess, and then he'd get in the way. He'd be a stumbling stone. Peter was there at the supper, the Last Supper, and he said, Jesus was telling them, I'm going to go to a place and you can't follow. You can't go. And Peter said, well, I'm going to go. I'd rather die than not follow you. There it goes. Wow. Jesus said, I'm going to do this back up too. Thank you, Phil. It's been a significantly shorter sermon. But again, at that point, Jesus says, you're going to deny me 3 times before this night is over. And we know the story. He does just that. As I said earlier, I want you to hear these words to Peter, this threefold restoration of Peter being spoken to you and I as well as to Peter. We really are going to make that jump. what he says to Peter and how Peter responds is what I think comes to you and I as modern day disciples. That same question, that same response, and the same sending and commissioning as well. So Michael Card, you may be getting used to Michael Card by now, wrote a song called "The Fragile Stone," and it speaks about Peter a little more. His love called you out on the water and held you when you were alone. For you were the rock that was broken by love, forever the fragile stone. You bore the burden of a name along a road that would lead to a cross. Bold and broken, upside down, a light for the least and the lost. He called you the rock, the foundation of a temple formed of God's love. His robe of forgiveness wrapping you up, meant trusting in him was enough. His love called you out on the water and held you when you were alone. For you were the rock that was broken by love, forever the fragile stone. His love was the hammer that broke you by his gentle and powerful hand. The mystery of mercy undid your denials. At last you could finally stand. The door that he opened was freedom. The door that he closed was your fear. Simply to rest in the arms of his love made all of your doubts disappear. His love called you out on the water and held you when you were alone. For you were the rock that was broken by love, forever the fragile stone. A stone that is dropped in the water will vanish and soon disappear. But the waves that move out from the center, in time they will reach everywhere. His love called you out on the water and held you when you were alone. For you were the rock that was broken by love, forever the fragile stone. For you were the rock that was broken by love, forever the fragile stone. Now, the 21st chapter of the Gospel of John seems to be kind of an addition to the Gospel. The Gospel ends beautifully at the end of chapter 20. But the 21st chapter is unique. None of the other Gospels mention this resurrection appearance, and it seems also to be written by the same hand and fits beautifully with it. So it's just, John comes back and kind of writes an addendum. And so we get this wonderful story in the 21st chapter. They've gone back to Galilee. Peter and 6 of the other disciples decided to go back fishing. And they're out in the boat, and they fish all night long, and they catch nothing. If that's starting to sound familiar, this is why John is sharing the story. Early the next morning, they see somebody standing on the shore. This person tells them to put the net on the other side. And they do, and lo and behold, they have a great catch of fish. And the disciple that Jesus loved, or John, says, "It's the Lord." At that point, Peter realizes this, puts his robe on, jumps into the water, and swims ashore, even as the disciples bring the boat in with this great catch of fish just 100 yards offshore. When Peter arrives, he sees a coal fire, fish and bread already on the fire. Breakfast is ready, and Jesus invites them to come and eat, and even come and bring some of the fish that they have also just caught. It's an interesting thing John talks about. They didn't dare ask if this was Jesus because everybody already knew it was Jesus. And that is a little different because in some of the resurrection appearances, you may remember Jesus was kind of hidden from them until he blesses something or he breaks bread or he says something to them. This is now the third time that Jesus has appeared to them after his resurrection. The central part of the story, or what I wanted to remind you of, this story of feeding and forgiveness and guidance and restoration and sending, that those middle verses, 15 through 17, is this threefold: do you love me? Yes, Lord, I love you. Feed my sheep. And as we read this, our minds cannot help but to remember chapter 18 in the Gospel of John, where he so famously denies Jesus 3 times. Also by a coal fire. Also when he's being asked, aren't you one of them? No, I am not. So 3 times Jesus says, do you love me? Yes, Lord, you know that I love you. Feed or tend, take care of my sheep. The third time, John even includes the story, there is hurt in Peter's mind or in his face from being asked this the third time. Jesus does not say, go build an empire. Jesus does not say, get your theology straight. Good idea, it's not bad. Jesus does not say, become politically powerful in the way the world thinks of power. He does not say, split into so many groups that it takes an encyclopedia to keep up with it. He doesn't say, spend a lot of time figuring out who should be let in and who should be kept away. He says, do you love me, Peter? Actually, Simon, son of John. He doesn't use Peter in this verse. Peter says, yes, Lord, you know I love you. Feed my sheep. Tend my flock. In verses 18 and 19, then he keeps on going. Jesus really is addressing Peter at this point. And he says, it's not going to go the way you think it's going to go, Peter. It's not going to go the way you think it will. When you were young, this happened. When you get old, other things happen. He mentions specifically that they will stretch out your arms, and that is very much a reference to crucifixion, the manner of death that Peter took on. Do you love me? Feed my sheep. This past weekend, or actually a weekend ago, we went to see the tulips over across the mountain. And we had been given directions by some good friends who live in Alaska. We're elders in my former church. They have an apartment down in Kent, and we were going to meet up with them and go see the tulips. And so they'd given us directions, which we followed to Mount Vernon. And then we were leaving Mount Vernon, and they did the old, well, you go on this street, and you're going to take a left, you go across the bridge, you're going to take a left, and then a right, and then one more right, and then you're in the parking lot. And I'm the driver, and I'm going, oh, yeah, I'm following you, Bob. I didn't take in all that. Now, we have this wondrous machine in the car, of course, that's giving that little still small voice from the phone. In 1,000 yards, you're going to take a left. So we were preparing to take a left, and Bob and Kathy just blow through that intersection, straight ahead. So we have about 500 feet to make a decision. Are we going to follow the directions from the phone, or are we going to follow who we want to stay with, who we want to be with that day? So we follow Bob and Kathy. And sure enough, we end up at Rosengard all the same, right? We find the parking lot, everything's good. But there's a decision that needs to be made. Are you going to follow the directions, maybe good directions, maybe directions from somewhere else, or are you going to follow the person, the relationship, the one that you trust? We trusted Bob and Kathy. They'd been to the tulips before. And so we went with Bob and Kathy. This is what Jesus is saying to Peter. Peter, it's not going to go the way you think it's going to go. But if you follow me, you're going to be okay. Follow me. Tend my sheep. Feed my sheep. There's so many folks within the church and outside of the church that are seeking guidance in this world. They're seeking, the real Jesus. They want to know, well, what does God have for me? What does Jesus really want me to do? And there's a whole bunch of answers out there. Some of them are great. Some of them are really poor. this text comes to us and it asks the right question. Do you love me? Simon, son of John, do you love me? Yes, Lord. You know I love you. And it doesn't stop there. Well, then tend my sheep. Feed my sheep. And if we go back to the 17th chapter of the Gospel of John, we are reminded quite clearly in something we sometimes call the high priestly prayer. Jesus is praying for the disciples. He prays for the people the disciples are going to bring. And then he really prays for all nations or all peoples. And he says, I have sheep that are not of this flock. I have sheep that are of other places. And as we see the gospel unfold in the book of Acts, and as we've seen the church unfold, lo, these many centuries, we understand the gospel is just for everyone. It's bigger. The text has that guidance. Tend and feed, follow Jesus, trust. And it also has this marvelous then turn of forgiveness. And restoration. And all of those things drew me, to the text when we were asked to do a resurrection appearance. Because I think we understand Peter. We understand the sin of wanting to do the right thing, of wanting to be bold and upfront in that confession, and then sometimes falling short, and at times disowning or denying the very Lord that we attempt to serve. We can do that by our inaction as well as our actions. Quite honestly, I think you and I fall into the inaction period as much as the other. So I understand Peter. I understand that sin of wanting to do the right thing and then just not doing it, either because I'm too ornery or too lazy or too pig-headed. I also hope that we understand the forgiveness and the restoration that's given in this text, the guidance and the restoration. We know what it is to be fed. We know what it is to be tended. And we know then that we are sent to do that with and for other people. I know that because of a marriage. 42 years, and there are times that I've done things that were not wise or not smart, and my wife has had the opportunity to forgive me. And she has. That's why there's 42 years and not 28. I know this because I got to raise 2 children, and my parenting was not always the best. Sometimes my parenting was out of anger, or sometimes my parenting was out of pride. Not good things to lead with. But my children continued to come home. They continued to give me birthday cards. I understand that forgiveness and that restoration. I understand that from the congregations that I served, and at times went off in a tangent or went off on a place that they did not need to follow. And yet they would return and say, okay, give it another go, Woodall. We'll see if you get it right this time. Well, most of us have those kind of relationships. I hope you do, where you've had that opportunity to be forgiven and restored. Most of us maybe have, or even working relationships where we've had that opportunity to have that give and take, a family member or an opportunity with a good friend. To be sent out to share that grace and mercy that we have been given in our relationships here in community and out there in the world. That is what the church can help us with. You are not alone in those struggles or in that journey. We stand there with Peter and we stand with one another. Do you love me? Yes, Lord. You know I do. Then go feed my sheep. So I want you to hear the good news in this text. Christ lived and died, was resurrected and ascended so that we might understand grace and mercy and power in ways that the world does not teach, in ways that the world does not show and remind us of. We understand grace and mercy and power in very different ways. And we get to share that and demonstrate that into this world, into our marriages, into our parenting, into our relationships with brothers and sisters and aunts and uncles The people we work with and the people that we play with, people here in congregations. Jesus meets us where we are. In this text, he met us on the shore. At times, he meets us at work. At times, he meets us on vacation, if we dare take Jesus along. Jesus meets us. Jesus has met me in sports teams. That's where I struggle to be Christian some days, because we know the rules are different when you have the opportunity to hurt somebody on the other side of the net. But that's a whole other story. Jesus meets us where we are. A fire made, fish and bread already prepared, and he invites us to come along and to add our own catch. So I'm going to ask you another time, and I want a response. Either a good solid yes or a good solid amen will do. One or the other, yes or amen. All right? Do you love Jesus? Yes. Oh, that's good. Well, let us be about feeding and tending the flock.